Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Rausan Pereira. After an eventful first day, US President Donald Trump and US First Lady Melania Trump were accorded a ceremonial reception by President Ramnath Kovind at the Rashtrapati Bhavan earlier today. Following this, the Trumps went to the Rajghat to pay their respects to the father of the nation, Mahatma Gandhi. President Trump and Prime Minister Modi later met at Hyderabad House for a round of restricted dialogue as well as delegation-level talks. Following this, both the heads of states issued a joint press statement. Trump said that ties between his country and India have never been as good as they are now. He expressed hope that India and the United States could reach a trade deal that will be of great importance to both countries and announced agreements for India to purchase more than $3 billion in advanced US military equipment, including Apache and MH-60 Romeo choppers. The visiting dignitary also said efforts have been made to revitalize the Quad initiative. He also spoke of expanding cooperation on counter-terrorism, cybersecurity and maritime security to ensure free and open Indo-Pacific. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze day 2 of President Trump's visit to India. Joining me on the program today are Professor Swaran Singh, Chairperson, Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament, JNU. Subimal Bhattacharjee, Defense and High-End Technology Expert, and Ashok Sajjanhar, former Ambassador. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, let me begin the program with you. If you could, list out 3 major highlights of day 2 of President Trump's visit to India, what would they be?
Well, Frank, 3 major highlights. What I would like to do is 2 in the bilateral context and 1 in the global context. So in the bilateral context, I would put defense cooperation, not only in terms of the $3 billion that has been announced in terms of anti-submarine helicopters and 6 Apache helicopters, anti-tank warfare, but in the context of the fact that, till about 8-10 years ago, our collaboration with the United States in the area of defense was virtually negligible. But in 2016, we signed, India was designated as the major defense partner. After that, we got the STA-1 categorization a little while ago. That is the Strategic Trade Authorization, which means that India could import technology up to the level of the NATO allies. And over this period, we have really enhanced our imports of sophisticated defense equipment and systems from the United States. It's come to about $18 billion, making it the second largest supplier of defense equipment to India. It includes M777 howitzers. It includes earlier Apache Chinook helicopters, heavy lift aircrafts, etc. over the last few years. We have also signed these very many basic defense agreements, whether it is the COMCASA or LIMOA, and of course the Industrial Security Annex, which was signed at the 2+2 meeting last December, which means that more technology could come into the country. And right. BECA, the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement, that remains to be done. So I want to put this $3 billion of imports in the context of the fact that we are a significant defense partner as far as the United States is concerned. We are also having the largest exercises all over the world, military exercises, whether it is with Air Force or Navy or Army. We had the Tri-Services Tiger Triumph exercises last November. So I think this is a burgeoning relationship in the area of defense, and in my view, defense forms a very significant pivot in the strategic partnership, which has now been enhanced to a comprehensive global strategic partnership between the 2 countries. So one is defense. The other I would like to say is energy, because energy security is very significant for India. India is importing 87% of its oil, about 40% plus of its gas, and the United States over the last few years has emerged as a very significant energy supply to India. As President Trump, in his statement at Hyderabad House, he said that since he came to office, export of energy to India has increased by 500%. So
Right.
it is in this area, also in the area of renewables and also in the area of nuclear energy. Because nuclear energy, again, between Westinghouse and NPCIL, Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited, there are discussions going for 1,100 megawatt power plants in Andhra Pradesh. So one is defense, the other is energy. And the third, in the global context, I would say his emphasis, what he put on revitalization of the Quad, as you mentioned yourself, and the fact that both the countries will be cooperating and collaborating more actively in the Indo-Pacific, have an open, free, peaceful, prosperous Indo-Pacific, also in the Indian Ocean, because we have seen that the assertiveness of China has been growing.
Sure.
The last point I would say, what the Prime Minister mentioned in terms of greater cooperation in technology matters. So I would emphasize these few points, which in my view, are the highlights of the discussions today.
Okay, let me take the points that you're making forward with the other panelists as well. Subimal, let's talk about defense cooperation. Let's talk about the high-end technology that we have in defense as well, and the deals that have been agreed upon. The choppers, of course, are high-end. I understand that they are one of the best in the world, really, as far as helicopters are concerned. What is the level of cooperation can we expect from India and the United States as far as defense is concerned?
Yeah, as Ambassador Sajjanhar has mentioned, ever since 2016, the defense cooperation has been enhanced, and this is primarily because India signed those foundational agreements. 2016, LEMOA was signed, 2018, COMCASA was signed.
Yeah.
BECA just remains, it's a question of a few months now. What's important to note is that American sales, by and large, till date is FMS dominated, their foreign military sales, which is a government-to-government sales. Much of that comes directly in, seller to buyer form, rather than any kind of offsets or any major activity within the country. Now, this last few years, ever since a push on Make India has been happening, the American companies are also being pushed to look at beyond FMS programs and all. I won't say that it has been absolutely successful, because even if you see today the two helicopter deals that are coming, one is a purely FMS, but the other is the Apache, 6 Apaches that is being looked at for the army, that is coming as a hybrid deal where you have the direct commercial sales as well as the FMS. But what is also important to understand is that over a period of the last 5-6 years, the American defense corporations also have been looking not only at the supply chain, but also trying to get into some bit of manufacturing. The Tata, Boeing and the Tata Lockheed Martin, both these institutions or companies within the laws of India based out of Hyderabad have already started manufacturing aerostructures, and even in the Apache's case also, the fuselage as well as the aerostructures would be built in India. Now, if you go back to the Dhirendra Singh Committee's report of 2015, which was looking at how do you expand the military industrial complex in the country and how you take it down to the various tiers. So, the idea should be to get into these programs where you can go down the tier. However, looking at what we are getting, and if at all the high-end technology is coming, if at all that technology transfer regime is becoming easier, because we have acceded to most of them. In fact, in my earlier days when I was heading an American defense company, one of the most, I would say, significant part was trying to decipher how you get these foundational agreements in place. Now, that trust, that comfort has been established. But are we getting, has the regime become easier? Now, if you look at this, beyond these two helicopters, what are there also in the pipeline? By now, we have done, with today's $3 billion, we would cross the $20 billion deal in a little over a decade. But what is coming, for example, the Predator, the armed drones, both for the Air Force, Army, as well as for the Navy. So, those are something that is going to be a differentiator. That's going to be something that India is possibly getting only beyond the NATO plus 5.
Right.
So, how much of that further, the PIs, A6 more P8Is, we are again looking to get them here. So, I think somewhere again we'll have to go down deeper and see how the Indian capacity to get into the whole manufacturing ecosystem, the overall, weaponization, and how do you strategize your functional requirement. Those are something that we'll have to get into. Otherwise, the buyer-seller ratio wouldn't come to a comfort level where you already have a issue where you have a lot of committed liabilities, and the budget support, whatever you can give, beyond a certain point, it will not match.
Absolutely, absolutely. Professor, let's take this issue of Quad forward, because that's something that the President very clearly stressed upon. He said that ever since he has come to the fore, there has been a lot of forward movement as far as Quad is concerned, and we've seen that taking place as well. And he said it's not just meetings, it is much more than meetings. Is there a message in that to China as well?
Definitely. I think there are more than one places where he has a message for China, for Pakistan. And Quad was one where intention has been to somewhere bring in the military component, the security component into the discussions at least, and then maybe move forward in terms of some kind of security architecture based around this axis. India, of course, looks at the same Quad very differently, but we noticed that he mentioned Indo-Pacific separately from Quad, which is what is India's take on this matter. India looks at Indo-Pacific very different compared to the Quad, and when it looks at Indo-Pacific, it emphasizes that for India, it must be centered around ASEAN and not around Quad. And also, of course, we don't want to see it militarized, or we don't want to see Indo-Pacific debate becoming exclusive to few countries, etc., etc. So there is this effort to play along with the United States and ensure that in general principles, we are together on the same page about freedom of navigation, playing by the rule, freedom of navigation, the fair and free trade, and these things, India and United States are perfectly on the same page. But when you look at the operationalization of how to ensure those things on the ground, there are little distinctions. And I think this was a nudge here to see that India has already upgraded its participation to ministerial level now, and whether we will still be moving forward from there. But I think talking other than tangibles, there are a lot of intangibles like this one, for instance, the distinction being made between Quad and Indo-Pacific. Most interesting was this whole debate about no trade deal. Very clear mention of how the two Commerce Minister of India, Piyush Goyal, and Commerce Secretary, Wilbur Ross, have, as he said, developed understandings around which the legal framework has to be now built. And of course, we've been hearing of the larger comprehensive free trade agreement between two states. So there is a forward movement indicated here, and a lot of things are expected to happen sooner than later. Second very closely related thing is that in absence of this trade deal, it's not trade is not happening. Lot of trade is happening. Ambassador just now mentioned about the booming sector of energy, for example. Defense, of course, is not typically counted as trade, but enormous transfer of technology even happening in that sense. So there is that, I think, intangible which is noticeable. Other than Indo-Pacific and Quad, he also mentioned about Wi-Fi technologies, where he mentioned that you should be partnering with countries where these technologies are supposed to lead to freedom and prosperity rather than suppression and censorship. So again, very clearly indicating that it's not Huawei which should be India's choice, and 5G is something which should be wary about engaging China on this. And very specific change when it comes to terrorism in Pakistan. You heard him yesterday talking about that he was satisfied with the efforts being made on terrorism between United States and Pakistan, and the relationship, he said, was very good. And today he mentions it very differently. He talks about how terrorism on the territory of Pakistan has to be addressed by Pakistan. Right. So that brings in FAFT, pressure in that sense. So FATF, deadlines which Pakistan has to fulfill. So there are also intangibles which are indicating as to where we are moving the relationship fast forward. Sure. Other than the tangibles which are things we have already clinched today. Absolutely. They are already achieved. I think it's equally important to see where is the direction that these two leaders are trying to push their relationship into.
Sure. Talking about terror, I'm just going to come to drugs and narco terror. That's another aspect that I want to take forward with you, Subimal. But since we are talking about Quad and the Indian Ocean, one more thing that the US President spoke about, and not much has been reported in the Indian media as far as this is concerned, Ambassador, I'm going to ask my guest to be brief as well because we've got limited time in the program. I'd like to get in closing comments as well. Ambassador, you know, the Blue Dot Network, that is something that the US President spoke about as well. It's said to be a counter really to China's BRI. We are not part of the BRI, but at some point can we expect to be a part of the BDN?
No, absolutely. I think that has generated a great deal of interest, you know, as far as the Blue Dot Network is concerned. You would recall, Frank, and I'm sure your viewers will also recall, that the beginning of the Blue Dot Network was at the East Asia Summit last year in November. And then this was taken year before that. And then this was taken up by G7 as an initiative. And Prime Minister Modi had been invited to Biarritz in France as a special invitee, and that is where the whole issue came up. So, you know, it's not an initiative by the United States, it's an initiative currently by the G7 countries, and India has been invited to join in. And of course, India is extremely interested. Now, we have said, you know, as far as connectivity issues are concerned, the development of infrastructure is concerned, you know, there have to be particular attention that has to be paid to sustainability, the fact that there should be transparency, no corruption, the fact that there is no debt trap to the receiving countries. Also, there is technology transfer and there are job creation. So, you know, those are all some of the basic conditions that we want to put as far as new infrastructure. But of course, is to be created in these different countries where infrastructure is required. But of course, India on its own cannot really do it. So it has to partner with other countries. And I think in this context, the collaboration between India and the United States, so you would recall that United States in its current budget has allocated $60 billion towards promotion of, towards execution of putting in place of infrastructure. So I think that is one area where we can work together with the United States in terms of providing infrastructure in Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, in Myanmar, some of the countries in South Asia where China has been extending its footprint. You would recall that when the last summit between India and Japan had taken place, then India and Japan, both Prime Minister Modi and Shinzo Abe, had decided that we will carry out joint projects both in Bangladesh and in Sri Lanka. And of course, we have the Asia-Africa Growth Corridor between India and Japan. So I think this is a huge possibility that, that is made available to us, and a very good avenue where we can collaborate to mutual benefit and to the benefit of all countries in South Asia and ASEAN.
Okay, all right. You know, Subimal, taking the discussion forward now, let's talk about another aspect that was taken up and that was spoken about extensively by both heads of states, of course, the issue of drugs and narco terror, and basically cutting or stifling the funding for terror through drugs and narcotics. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think this is a very important aspect of the relationship, because India is one of the big sufferers from many directions, you know, whether it is the northeast or whether even on the west, especially states like Punjab and all. A lot of the youths have lost, their youthfulness or, whatever the drive they need to go. And I've seen even right now through Mizoram, a lot of drugs entered the Indian state, going through the various northeastern states. And a lot of connivance happens at various levels. So there you need a lot of international cooperation, whether you attack it at the Afghanistan level, whether you attack it at the Pakistan level, whether you attack it at the Myanmar level and all. I think we need a lot of their support. We need a lot of technology support to be able to, nab and grasp the whole issue, because, we are being sucked into these even without realizing, and we are not realizing that the enormity of the problem. We are being impacted by this drug menace significantly in this, I would say both the geographies, and this is where I think it is a forward step. I think we need to devise some of the next steps very clearly. In fact, going a little bit on the Blue Dot also, where it is a kind of a multi-stakeholder approach, where you are looking at all the stakeholders to make their investments. Ambassador mentioned about the 60 billion, the Americans, but we have to invest a lot in matching, infrastructure and technology. And if you take the other multi-stakeholder approach, where we have been talking for years, but actually going nowhere, the cyber security or the management of cyber security aspects in the globe, it has to lead to something meaningful. So even a Blue Dot network in terms of addressing some of these narco terror or the drug networks or other kinds of attempts by terrorists to get into our networks, and particularly the young minds, I think that's where we have to really focus and go by a time-bound manner. So I would think that besides the optics and besides the bonhomie and the president, if you saw all through yesterday and today, every time he has been harping on the fact that he has had a great welcome. He has possibly understood kind of an Indian welcome to him, and then over the larger American context. I think these are the things we should drive through the White House and State Department and Pentagon and move our agenda also forward a little bit more than at the pace we have been doing.
Absolutely. On that note, the words unprecedented and incredible were used several times by the US President when he was addressing or when he was talking about his visit to India and how he felt really as far as the visit itself is concerned. So clearly a lot to take back home for him. But on this issue of terror, Professor, Pakistan was mentioned as well, at least on a couple of occasions when President Trump was addressing the gathering or the media. The idea of terror for India and the United States, are they different? At what level can we collaborate to try and put an end to terrorism? Because world over, countries have failed to define terrorism. So how is it going to be for India and the United States?
I think terrorism is clearly a shared problem of both India and United States. It's a global problem, and United States being seen as a global leader, and India is one of the emerging global leaders now. They have not just a challenge in front of them, but they also have responsibility to address such a global challenge. And to large extent, there is a sense that they both feel concerned in addressing that. But of course, their priorities, when it comes to what are the first things first for them, we will notice that then, of course, that becomes very different. For instance, instead of fighting Taliban, the US is negotiating Taliban, and India was very uncomfortable with treating, moderate terrorism and, the radical terrorism kind of definitions. And they are negotiating with Taliban, and Taliban could be part of, the governance in Afghanistan. So it is kind of going back to the point zero where we started, where they wanted to sort of remove Taliban and make sure that, there are alternative arrangements of politics are made there. So, there are discomfort levels. For us, for example, very different outfits are kind of immediate concerns for us. Jaish-e-Mohammed, for example, is much important concern for us than it would be for United States. For till recent time, for example, Daesh or ISIS was the main concern for United States. It was not that much of a major concern. Not that we are not really worried about them, but that was not priority number one for India. So in operationalizing, yes, there are, I think then priorities are slightly different. But where they can stand together definitely is what you mentioned about defining terrorism. And that's an effort India has been pushing since 1994 at United Nations, that we need to have an international convention on countering terrorism. And if we have United States on our side, I think we can move that much faster forward. And I think that is something which will then help us in defining terrorism in various theaters. And of course, Pakistan also keeps coming under pressure, but of course, it's no same relationship. United States treats Pakistan as a frontline state, very often as a friend of United States. Of course, India doesn't see Pakistan as friend of India or sort of any partner in fighting terrorism. In that sense, we see them as breeders of terrorism.
Absolutely.
So
we blame them for all the terrorism.
So strategies are different. Theoretically, I think in terms of principles, a lot of similarities, but not in terms of priorities as they choose what to do first.
Okay, all right. Time now to get quick closing comments from the visit of US President Trump to India. I'm going to ask my co-panelists to be brief. I've got limited time on the program. Ambassador, closing comments from you first.
I'll make two comments, Frank. One is, about the trade deal that has been mentioned. We've been saying no trade deal, but notwithstanding that, trade between India and the United States has been burgeoning more than 10% every year. United States is the largest trading partner in goods and services, $160 billion. We have a target of $500 billion by 2025, and we need to work to attain that. But that having been said, you know what the Foreign Secretary said today? That one is a mini trade deal, on which he said Wilbur Ross and Piyush Goyal are working. That is going to be on MFN. The other, the big one, is going to be a bilateral deal between India and the United States. And that is going to be only tariff exchanges and all the conditions exchanges between India and United States. That would be in the nature of an FTA, a free trade agreement.
Sure.
And I think that's going to be huge. The last comment would be on DTTI, the Defense Technology and Trade Initiative. It was decided in 2012. Nothing much has really happened. No transfer of technology from the United States to India. Under the Make in India program, and since we are such significant importers of defense equipment from there,
right,
we need to get more technology from them. We need to become more self-sufficient in defense production, not be dependent upon United States, Russia, France, Israel,
right,
etc., for meeting our defense requirements. And the first requirement there would be a better economy and more technology.
Okay, all right. Subimal?
Oh, well, the ambassador almost stole my thunder around the DTTI, but I wanted to stress and emphasize that, initially 6, then 3, now again 2 last December when it was spoken, the 2+2. But I think this is something that is really not taken off. Both sides have their concerns. I think this is something that would have been wonderful, first in terms of R&D and then going into the manufacturing aspect, and particularly it would benefit India more. So we have to emphasize a lot on how to revive the DTTI as well as the High Technology Cooperation Group. That initially in the 2008-9 period it was quite active. Later it almost went down. So these are the two things I think we need to emphasize. I think on 5G, Americans have been racing it with us for quite some time. We have, been also internally addressing the issue. And I think on the trials last December, as you have heard from the minister, that everyone would be allowed for the trials. But we are factoring all the issues that are there. So if, the security aspect, I think somewhere we can learn from the Americans as we can learn from the Australians.
It will be better.
And of course, cyber technology, I think we need to refocus more.
Professor.
Okay, very quickly, I think increasingly the reflection is that India-United States relationship has become the one among equals. And the last meeting that President Trump had is with the business leaders. And we saw him almost soliciting investments from India. That shows that India has a role to play in both economic growth and employment generation in United States, which leaves us with a good feeling that there is an increasing recognition that it's not one-sided relationship. India can contribute to the growth and development in United States.
Okay, all right. On that note, then we'll call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that 2 fruitful days as far as US President Donald Trump is concerned in India. The visit has been fruitful, the visit has been productive, and a lot of takeaways really from this visit. And we expect the relationship only to go upwards from here is what the panelists are suggesting. With that, it's a wrap. See you again next time.